Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Research Findings, Analytics as a Source of Business Innovation. My name is Steve Paul, contributing editor at MIT Sloan Management Review. I'll be your moderator today. Our thanks go out to SAS for their sponsorship of this webinar. This event will be recorded and will be available to all attendees approximately 3 to 4 business days after the live event. We welcome your questions for our speakers today. To submit the questions, please enter them anytime in the chat box in the lower corner of your console. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. If you're having any audio difficulties while listening via computer, please call in via telephone instead, or check the help link in the upper part of your console. And now on to our presentation, Research Findings, Analytics as a Source of Business Innovation. Discussing today's topic will be David Caron, Executive Editor of MIT Sloan Management Review, and Sam Rathbottom, Associate Professor of Information Systems at Boston College and Guest Editor at MIT SMR. Let's begin with Sam.
Hi, welcome everybody. This is Sam's voice. If you lose track of who's talking, I'm the one with the silky smooth southern accent. I hate too much preamble, but I would be negligent to skip a few important thank yous to everyone that's been involved with this research. First, as Steve mentioned, we certainly appreciate the support of our sponsor, SAS, and John Bala in particular. Pamela Prentice has also been involved for many years in the development of the categories that we'll mention later. Additionally, it takes quite a number of people at MIT SMR to get such a high-quality product complete. Deb Gallagher, Lauren Rosano, Nina Krushwitz, and I probably shouldn't have started listing names because I'm sure I've left somebody out. I'm sorry. And our research, it builds on interviews and surveys, and we appreciate everyone who helped with both of those. And finally, we appreciate everybody who's read the report and is joining us today for the webinar. It looks like we have a truly stunning number of people registered today and attending. Thank you. It's clear that this topic is of widespread interest. So our general plan for today is to quickly give you some background about this year's analytics study and finding. And after that, we'll delve into a few key points from our research, and then we'll have some time for your questions. As Steve mentioned, there's a place where you can enter some questions in the webinar system, and we'll try to answer those as we go if we can. If we can do that in real time. I'm not sure how capable I am of doing that. But we'll definitely try to get to as many as we can at the end. I'm actually sitting here in the same room with David, and so we're hoping that this can be a little more conversational as a result. We can see each other, and hopefully we can make it something that's useful for you. Anyway, so that's enough. Enough preamble. This whole time you've been looking at a car. Why? Well, as you might have guessed from the Bridgestone header, our focus is actually on the tire and not the car. Are tires related to analytics? Well, and we're going to make an argument that they somewhat are today. And I'll start by sharing a story from Bridgestone, and then David has some additional comments about how tires are great and how tires and analytics intersect. I picked this picture of a spiffy car and its tires, but there are obviously lots of other tires in the world. For example, is a tractor, obviously. A big, knobby, wide tires. It warms my little southern heart to see it. And it's a very different tire than that on the spiffy car. Or this truck. You know, it has, I'm sure there's some fancy tire terminology that I should be using, but it has lots of treads and things on it. Unfortunately, my tire taxonomy and vocabulary is a bit weak. We have an ATV, all-terrain vehicle. That's what the AT is. And that obviously requires different tires than the spiffy car, which is on paved roads. Or this motorcycle that I was really just clearly looking for an excuse to include in the webinar because I like the picture and the paint job. But even if it's intended for the pavement, just like the sedan is, it has a very different need in terms of tires. And finally, I would not be a true Southerner if I did not actually include a monster truck in our tire examples. Again, very different tires.
Were you driving that?
I was not driving that. It is not my car. Although in Boston today in the snow, it would have been useful. What's more interesting is it's not just the vehicle that differs. There are different uses. A hot, dry climate requires harder rubber to cope with higher temperatures. As I mentioned, we're in the middle of a freak blizzard here in Boston, and I see that David is twitching from seeing the snow, given that we just had a big snow event yesterday. And tires can be used for lots of different purposes: boat bumpers, obstacles. If you're a southerner, they can even be decoration for your yard. So my point is actually not so much about tires, despite how much I've talked about tires so far. The point is not actually tires. My point is about product specialization. Tires have come a long way since the vulcanization process was invented in the early 1800s. And as a fun bonus fact, much of the development seems to have occurred in a town in Massachusetts, Woburn. It's not far from where we are now. Tires have come a long way because they have increasingly specialized vehicles. These vehicles operate in lots of different environments, and they're operated by lots of different drivers. So Bridgestone knows this. And I mentioned that Bridgestone is who our example is about. They offered bunches of tires, tons of tires, each designed to fit a specific context, and that's great. But the difficulty is inventory. So when people need a tire, they typically need it immediately or even sooner. So it's in Bridgestone's best interest to have the tires on hand that fit their potential customer at the moment that they need it. Unfortunately, space is limited. They can't carry infinite quantities of every tire in every store, but they probably don't have to. Going back to the snow tire example, if you take a look, we don't need that sort of tire in Atlanta, Georgia, where I grew up. Not much demand for snow tires in Georgia. So as a result, Bridgestone allocates their scarce inventory space for their retailers and distributors by using their knowledge of the area, their customers, and probably tons of other factors that that they know a whole lot more about than I do, obviously. That's the main point of our story. There are three parts of this story that fit really well with the main findings from our research this year. What I like about the first part of the story is that they know what products are needed by using analytics. We've moved from an economy that's been driven by economies of scale. We've moved through economies driven by personalized products that are actually delivered at scale. So, whoops, I shouldn't have done that. Analytics is what's making all this personalization happen. Much is made about this transition from atoms to bits. But a lot of things like tires are still atoms. They exist. They exist in the real world. And that can blossom into difficulties for people managing these atoms at personalized and individual space. We can't have lots of things, lots of product specialization, without actually needing space for those atoms. But again, analytics is helping with this too. Analytics is helping us know where to place those atoms. And finally, something that we'll talk about more later is this application of analytics can then liberate humans to do the things that humans are good at. That's leading to some novel ideas at Bridgestone. For example, Bridgestone can get better real-time data to be more proactive about maintenance rather than waiting for a customer to come in with a problem. This is a great new opportunity that data could provide for them. So, in the big picture, we talked with people at Bridgestone, and their team allocating inventory was overwhelmed. I tried to come up with some facts about how many locations they had to think about, but even coming up with that number was hard. Bridgestone has a Vision 2020 statement that projects 3,000 different retail outlets. There are tons of other distribution facilities. There's also lots of third-party distributors, and it's really hard to know what should go where. When Keith Moody, when we talked to him, he said that the reaction of the people in their organization was, please help us. We need help doing this. And the idea is that in spending their days trying to get, instead of trying to get the stock levels exactly right, their team can now spend their time with strategic questions. They're happy to let the model do the grunt part. Analytics is allowing more specialization and more products and services. but it's also taking away the drudgery and freeing people to do the things that people are good at. And this isn't just about tires. It's analytics fundamentally changing the way the businesses work. In the next few minutes, we'll go over some key findings from our research. First, we're seeing that organizations are reporting competitive advantage from analytics, and this is increasing for the first time in 3 years. And we'll talk about how this has changed. Second, it's not just a competitive advantage. Just like Bridgestone, organizations are using analytics to innovate. And we'll talk about how organizations are doing that. Third, we're excited about the role of governance. Governance is enabling this innovation. And governance is rarely an exciting topic, but we're going to try to make it a little bit exciting. And we'll talk about some of the processes behind this and the implications for organizing data. And finally, smart machines. Smart machines are creating opportunity for innovative thinking. We'll talk about how leading organizations differ in this area than others. So next, David's going to share with you some of the background of our study and how we did it, and then we'll go through some of the results of our report. And as a reminder, send in questions if you have them. We're trying to check those in real time here. You can probably see our cursor moving around as we're trying to figure out how to check those questions. And also, the bottom of the screen has a URL where our actual full details of the report are. So I encourage you to go look at that and a lot of the other content that we have around data and analytics. So David, I'm going to turn it to you. I'm looking at you to tell us how we did the research and how it fits into the larger analytics initiatives at MIT SMR.
Thanks, Sam. So I just wanted to add to that wonderful Bridgestone example that we opened up the report with. It's not just Bridgestone that's trying to do innovative things with their product. There's this Italian tire manufacturer, Pirelli. They at the Geneva Motor Show that just happened in Geneva, and no, we did not have a field trip to there. But they rolled out a smart tire. And what could a smart tire possibly be? Well, they embedded sensor. They've now embedded sensors into the tire to measure a whole bunch of things. Bridgestone, I think, is trying to do the same kind of thing using telemetry data. But they're going to be tracking, the Pirelli is going to be tracking things like vertical loads, tire wear, and other kinds of maintenance-related kinds of data that can be shipped to a, I don't want to mix metaphors, but it's like going to be sort of conveyed to an app on the driver's phone, possibly not while they're driving, but that can alert them to where they might go if they need a new tire of the kind that they're currently driving. So there's a lot of innovative things that are happening in this industry that, as you mentioned, have been started with the vulcanization process, a long time ago. So to the study. So this year's study, Analytics as a Source of Business Innovation, is the 7th research report that we've done in this space on data and analytics. We have a couple other big idea initiatives looking at artificial intelligence, sustainability, and digital transformation. And we've been tracking, what's exciting about this particular program in data and analytics, where we've had the fortune of being sponsored by SAS for a number of years, we've been tracking the evolution of organizational uses of data across industries since 2010. Each of the reports you see here are based on thousands of responses to an annual survey. And the survey respondents that are represented are a diverse group of managers and companies, different functions, different levels of responsibility, different sizes, different locations around the globe. Now, along with the reports you see here, we've also published dozens and dozens of blogs on the impact of data on management. Okay, many of these now are SAMs, which we're very, very happy about. And I'm not just saying that because Sam is sitting next to me. Sam has also been involved.
That's very true.
Sam has also been involved in the last 3 reports, along with a feature article That was based on our research findings. And I encourage everyone on the webinar to take a look at these previous reports, since they offer specific insights into how to address management opportunities and challenges connected with a data-driven organization, including things like talent and culture, strategy, and leadership. In addition to the surveys that these reports are based on, we also interview thought leaders, practitioners, and scholars to develop some real-life examples of our findings, and also deliver a check on whether our findings resonate in the market and among those who study these trends. So these 7 annual reports collectively offer a distinctive look at how organizations are using data, how they've changed how they're using data, and the kinds of strategies they're adopting to become more data-driven. So that's the background for the study, and we're very excited about this year's results. In part because of this trend that you see here, and partly because of this trend. So what this graph shows, since 2010, we've been asking managers and all these different organizations to say whether or not they're getting a competitive advantage from analytics. And the percent who actually believe that their business is getting a competitive advantage went up in 2010, it went up in 2011, and it peaked in 2012, and then it started to decline. Now, in 2010, a few things were happening to explain this particular curve. One is, or the first part of the curve, we were at the beginning of a hype cycle. Companies had more access to data than they ever had before. And many companies became successful with analytics simply by doing a better job with the data they had. There was a lot of low-hanging fruit, and that's the last time I'll say low-hanging fruit in this. I
Just
want to promise.
That's a bingo word for us.
In our third report, we told the story of a dairy company, Oberweis, that used data to discover that their most valuable customer wasn't the customer that their experienced leaders thought. And this was an application of data that they had never done before with the person in charge of data that they had never had before. And so when this peak was reached and the low-hanging fruit was picked, we were at like 67% of respondents saying that their company was getting a strategic benefit from analytics. But since then, there has been this decline, and more companies began using data. There was a rapid increase in the amount of data that was available to folks, and some of the hype had worn off. As a result, those are the sort of the big factors we think will be part of the decline. But that changed this year. What you see here is from 2015, there was a big jump. What explains that? And so you see at the bottom from 2015 to 2016, the share of organizations reporting that analytics creates a competitive advantage actually went up 6 percentage points, and that is a big jump. And a big part of the report is trying to explain this change. So as part of the explanation for what has changed, we took a look at some answers to questions that we've been tracking for several years. On the left, you see percent of respondents reporting a somewhat or significant increase in access to useful data. Those are the green bars, and the orange bars, hopefully they look orange on your screens. These represent the percent of respondents who are somewhat or very effective at using insights to guide future strategy. Oh, good. All right. There was an echo, and Sam, Sam solved it. So I was being grateful there. So what you see here is that the green bars reflect the percent of respondents who are increasing their access to useful data year over year. So 70% say in 2012 that they had more data, they had more access to useful data over the past year. And an even higher percentage said the same thing in 2013 relative to 2012. And in 2014, there was even like more people saying that, as a percentage, saying that they had access to more useful data. So access to more useful data going up and up and up. And yet, the orange bars show a decline in the percent of respondents saying that they were effective at using insights to guide future strategy. And our interpretation over this for the past, well, in the past years, was that there was information overload. It was just very difficult to manage all of the information that folks had access to. But in 2016, what we see is that the orange bar went up, despite there being still a high percentage in the green bar, in the people reporting access to an increase in access to useful data over the previous year. That is very interesting because it seems to suggest that people are getting a better handle on all of the information that they have access to. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam.
Yeah, one of the ways that we think about how organizations are is we think about how mature they are for from their analytical processes. And so we started 40 years ago, I think, with some different categories of 3 levels of analytical maturity. First being the analytically challenged, then analytical practitioners, and then analytical innovators. So our analytically challenged group, they're again focusing more on intuition. They seem to be doing more optimization or cost reduction processes around incremental improvements. They may be limited by some data quality or availability issues. They may not have some of the talent and skills to take advantage of all the data they have, and they tend to be somewhat descriptive in their approaches. Our next group is the practitioners, and these are a group of people that have maybe gotten off the beginning and are working to become more data-driven. They're still primarily operational, but are better about having data quality that's good enough to be able to make decisions from. And they're increasingly able to get that information to the people who need that information. And these people are having gradually more and more complex approaches to analytics. Our most mature group is what we call the analytical innovators. These are a group of people who have really focused analytics culture throughout their organization. They tend to be using analytics not just for operational categories, but for strategic analysis. They really recognize the value of data for their organization and what data can do. Throughout the organization, they have better abilities embedded in not just the management, but across the organization and how to use that data. And we find that their approaches tend to be more sophisticated than the basic descriptives. I mention these because we're going to focus on these categories in some coming slides, and one of the things that we've tried to be consistent about is this beige color is our analytically challenged folks, the green color is our practitioners, and this reddish color is the analytical innovators, and that'll be a theme that we'll carry forward from here. So one of the things that we think is interesting is looking at what happens year by year. So if we think about our categorization, the definition of how we categorize people hasn't changed. But what's changed over time is the composition of our survey respondents. So starting initially, we had a very small group of people who were analytical innovators in the 11% category. Most people fell in the practitioners, and then the analytically challenged group is at 29%. And one of the things you notice as you look at those red bars with the analytical innovators is how stable those are over time. We just haven't had a lot of fluctuation in that group. What we saw fluctuation with last year was a pretty sizable jump in the number of people that considered themselves analytically challenged, which is interesting. You might think of maturity as being a pure progression and something that people couldn't go backwards, not revert. But I think there's several stories there, and we explored some of that last year in thinking through why people may be classifying themselves in this way.
Do you remember the name of that report?
Beyond the Hype was the name of that report. David's setting me up for, yeah. So you'd like to see that. That report's at that URL as well. What was interesting for us this year was how the analytical innovator group changed. For the first time, we saw a pretty sizable jump in the groups of organizations that we would classify as analytical innovators. And a point I'll make is that we're not asking people to classify themselves. We've got a set of questions that we use to try to infer their maturity level based on their responses. And so what we saw there is that this analytical innovators group rose substantially for really the first time ever. It was a substantial rise. And this largely came back at the kind of the expense of or taking away from the group of analytically challenged people. That dropped by almost the same percentage. We think that that's an interesting reflection of what's happening in the
Business
kind of
landscape.
business landscape. Yeah. So what's going on? I think one of the things that we focused on this year was how people are using analytics has changed. So one of the things that we liked that we thought was interesting to focus on this year was how are people innovating? We've always been curious about how, do people use analytics for innovation, but we got into more depth this year in our survey and our interviews about the ways in which they're innovating. I think your classic example would be to think about analytics as being great at improving either existing products or services. And it is. I don't mean to be discounting that at all. If you look at the first two bars there, existing processes and existing products and services, we've got pretty substantial differences from our gray people our beige people who are the analytically challenged, our green people, the practitioners, and the analytical innovators. Marked differences in how they're able to use analytics to improve existing products and existing services and processes within the organization. But what we particularly enjoyed this year is we asked them questions about new processes and new products and services that have come up. And David mentioned one of those earlier with Bridgestone and some examples of how tires can lead to organizations to start a new business model that's much more proactive than reactive. This was a theme kind of throughout many of our interviews and discussions this year. And what I find interesting is how high those analytical innovator numbers are around using analytics for new stuff, not just to improve the existing stuff. What happened? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one of the really interesting things that happened this year was that these categories are built off of questions related to what extent are you using analytics and data to innovate, to what extent are you using data and analytics to get a competitive advantage. And oftentimes the percentage of organizations who say they're getting a competitive advantage from analytics are like way higher than the percentage that are saying that they're innovating with analytics. And this year, that gap between the percentage of folks who said that they're getting a competitive advantage from analytics and the people who said that they're getting innovation benefits from analytics, that closed.
And we think that there's a specialization story playing out here, and that's going to be a theme that comes up throughout the rest of our discussion here. That what's happening is people have kind of figured out the basics, and they're getting better at using and applying analytics in the ways that make them better, stronger, and faster. You remember the $6 Million Man from days of yore. I mean, this is the result here. It's not just a man. It's a new way of doing things, and that's a theme that's been throughout the rest of the story here.
Any opportunity to talk about Lee Majors, I think, is a good opportunity.
Hey, I was a member of the $6 Million Man Club when I was growing up.
All right, we don't need to.
You don't need to know that?
No, I don't. I don't think anybody else needs to. This shows. So where is innovation taking place within an organization? I mean, we know innovation doesn't occur evenly in organizations, and this is certainly true with respect to database innovation. I mean, if you look at the respondents who represent different functional departments that use analytics to innovate, most are using analytics to improve existing products, service, and processes rather than to create new ones, as Sam was just alluding to or stating. In this chart, the smaller percentages mean a focus on using analytics to improve existing process, and the larger percentages mean a greater focus on using analytics for new processes. 50% is a balanced mix. This chart shows that some functional areas are using analytics to innovate new products and processes more than others. Some of these more progressive departments are in obvious places, like product development and R&D. And when we get results like this, when it affirms common sense, we in some respects are comforted by this because it's not wildly off kilter. However, but there was a surprise, and that was human resources, which is middle of the pack with respect to using analytics to develop new processes. So we had some fun conversations to talk about sort of why this might be, and the interpretation we settled on was, for many HR departments, any new application of analytics would count as developing a new process. I mean, not to put too. I mean, does that sort of? That's not too critical of HR, I hope. But
it's historically an area that has been less automated and less data focused.
Thank you. That was a slightly more sophisticated statement. So this actually, this finding about HR is actually more pronounced in this slide, which offers more detail on the extent to which departments are using analytics for improving and developing new products, services, and processes. What this slide shows is on the vertical axis, you've got all the different functions, and then on the right-hand side, it's the percent of folks who are saying that they are using analytics to improve whatever whether it's the current process, current products and services, current or new processes, or developing new products and services. HR in this instance is simply not the department one would expect to be applying analytics in so many innovative ways, especially in relation to other departments. But it does make sense if HR departments have this history of not being all that innovative. The enticing implication...
Innovative with data.
Innovative with data. Sorry.
Not to disparage.
Apologies to all HR representatives on the webinar. But it does make sense. So the enticing implication here is that data and analytics offers less innovative departments with analytics a path for change. In general, what we see is that departments tend to be using analytics for various skills, risk management, and product development functions. These all seem to be using analytics the most to develop new products and services.
So one of the things that we tried to explore was how people are actually going about this innovation process. What's the mechanism behind how analytics is working here? And one of the things that we found was interesting was we asked some people about how much data that they share with other organizations. And what we found was, not terribly surprising that people do share information more with customers versus competitors. That doesn't surprise us, although we note that it's not completely empty how people are sharing with competitors. What we see here is whether people are sharing kind of a low amount or a high amount, and the percentages there are the people who agree to a moderate or great extent that their data security practices allow them to get value from analytics. And so what I like about this is that it's some benefits to investments that people are making in data governance and in security. And that pays off in their ability to share, and then it flows through to their ability to innovate. And I think that's particularly important. And one of and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you want to be safe if you're going to do experimentation, if you're going to do innovation. You want to be able to do it in a way without putting at risk, important processes or operations. One of the good quotes was from Peter Levin at Intel, and he talked about two different things. When you start to share data, you also increase the ability to be good stewards of data. But there's also sorry, we got a little echo there, a need for more protocols around sharing. You can't just share data. People won't know what the data is. People won't know what it means. And so if you just share, then you need to have processes and governance around that. And one of our final points here was around how analytics enables this task innovation. So if we think about automation and augmentation tasks. Having data analytics abilities should lead to people have more tasks to automate, and that's our first question there. And we see that analytical innovators are much more likely to be able to automate tasks. But not just automate, we thought it was interesting that the augmented is even higher, so that there are, in fact, people who are taking tasks and applying analytics to part of that task, or to enable people to work better and faster. And I think the Bridgestone example speaks to that well. The last column that I'll focus on is the new human task. One of our big concerns in society now is what happens when automation comes through. This is the fourth industrial revolution and all the concern about artificial intelligence. And so, what's going to happen when this happens? This is hugely important. And as humans, we've always found a way to be productive up to now, but that's always true up until it isn't true anymore. And so the net effect is important. And we think it's interesting that the new human tasks are being created really seemingly about the approximate same rate of tasks being augmented or augmented.
Well, before we go to the next slide, though, we should point out that the new human tasks are being created at the top end here of with the analytical innovators, who represent a much smaller portion of our overall sample.
All right. One of the things we also thought was interesting about how is analytics changing the power structures within organizations. And we have two bars here. One bar, the reddish bar, is about how analytics has affected the formal authority in organizations. The green bar is about their control of knowledge and information. And what we see that organizations or parts of organizations, departments within organizations, the customer service and the finance groups are for examples, places where formal authority is much lower than their ability to have influence through data. And we think that's actually quite important. I think we're kind of running a little slow on time here, so I'll shift over. We got more we could say about that, but let's move forward just a little bit.
Okay, so I'll wrap up sort of the discussion of the report, and then we'll move to a Q&A session. I know the questions have been rolling in, and thank you for sending in the questions. So going forward, we've got a couple points for us to consider. One is organizations are beginning to organize themselves around data. And one of the key points that we see as a trend is sort of organizations, you need to organize around, if you're going to organize around data, you need to treat data as a valuable asset. And what we've talked about is analytical innovators taking data seriously as a source of innovation. And while there's certainly lots of ways an organization might do this, and it's difficult to say something really meaningful in 20 seconds about this beyond what's already been said, the point that Sam was just making about data governance is really spot on. Data governance is relevant to successful data innovation, and ensuring that the right people in the organization participate in the data governance process is really crucial to creating confidence in the data. Confidence, and we see that confidence is really necessary for making analytical insights not only useful, but also used. So changing cultural norms around sharing. I mean, one of the benefits of a webinar format is that we can't see the glaze that forms over listeners' eyes when we mention culture and data in the same sentence. But with that, I'd like to talk very briefly about the importance of culture and data. We discussed some examples of this in the report, but one of my favorite examples about the importance of the need for having cultural norms around data sharing comes from the publishing industry. The following happens, or at least used to happen, at the Huffington Post, where journalists and data analysts sat side by side, and the journalists would change article titles and change the content positions on a web page, and sometimes the content itself, in response to real-time traffic data and experimentation that data analysts were doing right next to them. Now, this was a huge change for journalists who weren't accustomed to having their work mediated by really anyone other than fellow journalists. And indeed, the HuffPost initially had trouble hiring and retaining journalists who were comfortable in this kind of work environment. So knowing who's working on what data sets and having access to insights across an organization that can support innovation is really important. But data sharing practices need to be embedded in an organization or they won't generate value for long. Ensuring functional areas have data and analytics capabilities. Very quickly, advancing data-driven behavior in an organization depends in no small way on really ensuring that functional areas have access to data capabilities, not just to the data. This too can happen in many ways. Access to centralized analytics experts, democratizing access to tools and data, building up data capabilities in the functional areas. But managers should recognize that there are limits to what analytical capabilities can do by themselves. It can be the case that creating systems and processes that deliver the right information to the right person at the right time, like many of us have heard this repeated ad nauseum, this is simply not enough in many cases. This is especially true if a model is out of date, just to give one example. In such situations, the model delivers the right data based on the model's parameters, but it's the wrong information if the parameters should have been updated. Updating one's data capabilities should be an ongoing process. To the last point, narrowing strategic focus where advantage is strongest. The story that we tell in the report about Wahoo's innovation is a glimpse into what's next for many companies. They use data to identify their most valuable customers and customize new products for them. Data can help companies refine their understanding of their customers and support development of innovative new products. And this is likely to be the most common path, but it's also possible that that there's another track where some of the largest companies like GE and McKesson are building business models, entirely new business models, off of their expertise with analytical capabilities, and it actually reflects an expansion of strategic focus. The reason why we focus on here the narrowing is because that's probably going to be the likeliest path for many organizations. So with that, thank you. So either way, whether it's the narrowing the strategic focus or expanding it, this year's report shows that many more companies are focused on using data to advance their strategies. We hope you found this discussion interesting and useful, and if you'd like to read the report, please use the URL at the bottom of the screen here.
Okay, so while David has been talking, I've been trying to dig through the questions that people have been asking, and actually I know our audio seemed to drop there for a second, and I apologize for that. We're not sure what happened there, but it seems to be back and working now. There are a lot of questions out there, and it's really hard for me to dig through them. I'm just going to ignore all the ones that were making fun of the $6 million man comments, and we'll just move on from that. One of the questions that we did get was about the fact that, you know, someone mentioned Latin America as a specific, but there are many markets where analytics is still emerging or that may not be as developed. The listener mentioned Latin America as one. So, you know, to what degree is this a geographically focused trend? Is it everywhere? How is this playing out in terms of the breadth of maturity across geographies and across organizations? I'm looking at David, hoping that he has something to say here.
So, I do believe that for large organizations, so it's funny, these geography questions have several different elements to them. One is there are large organizations that sort of have that are operating in emerging countries, and they have their expertise that they bring to these locations, and that's sort of one path that happens. So it's not, even though it's sort of at a mega level, these countries that get characterized as emerging, you know, don't have a lot of expertise. Some of the foreign direct investment in them in these countries actually is a pathway for bringing expertise in. And it's definitely true that there are many regions that don't have a lot of data expertise, and it's not completely different from the representation of analytical capabilities that we see in our data, which is aggregates across countries and across different kinds of organizations. It's still the case that analytical innovators represent 17% of all the organizations that are represented in our survey, and
it's not 83%.
And it's not 83%. So the other 83% is, and it's not, and that's not evenly distributed across the other things. So we've asked companies in interviews, company representatives in interviews, do you see yourselves as ahead of or behind or on par with your competitors? And it's still often the case that even with companies that we would assert to others as being advanced, they don't see themselves that way. So there's also a perceptual
yeah, I think that perception thing is big. Yeah, we look at organizations, and it's easy to look at the people who are doing amazing things. Most people aren't, and so just because people are not, that doesn't mean that you're hopelessly behind. There's a lot of opportunity still, and there's a lot of time to make up for it. The question's really overwhelming, and there's really just no way we're going to get to all of them. I'm going to tick through a couple that we can perhaps speak to more directly, but sorry if I'm ignoring some. David mentioned some size effects, and we've had some questions about size effects there. One thing that I think is particularly interesting is how do you communicate the value of analytical investments? So people in small, medium businesses that may not have massive budgets to put this, how can they justify investments in analytics?
So if it's a strategic, if an organization believes, if the leadership believes that data and analytics can take their company to a new place, then developing the talent to support that strategic push is essential. It's more like how can you not make the investment rather than whether or not one might. That's one component. That's one way of addressing that. Another one. So there's that talent issue, but then there's also like a big question about to what extent do you need to build an in-house analytics capability to address the kinds of business issues that you would like to address with data, and sometimes you can go some distance with having to outsourcing those.
One of the things we asked about 2 years ago was where are people getting the resources they need, and there's a mix of all sorts of different approaches to getting information and getting analytical capabilities within organizations. That's not exactly the same as the complete investment, but that's a big part of the investment, particularly when technologies.
Well, and it's also, the other thing is the question about sunk costs. If you have data and you believe that there's already latent value to be had in the data that you currently have, then you're leaving that value on the table if you're not investing in trying to derive more business value from it.
So one of the things that people were asking about is, okay, can you get your competitive advantage from technology? And I think our rejoinder there is that there's so many other pieces involved here besides technology. And we focused on talent a couple of years ago. One of the things
you can't just buy your way into getting an advantage with this. There's so many different components.
One of the things that people have asked about are what are some of the barriers that people are keeping people from progressing along this. One of the questions that we do ask people every year is, what's holding you back? What are the sort of obstacles? And one recurring theme is how low technical things are on that list. It almost doesn't matter what form we ask it. People don't tend to talk about the technology as being the things that limit them. I guess there are more workarounds for that. It ends up being the things like culture and leadership and getting strategic insights from data, translating analytics results into business value. These are the kinds of things that show up over and over again. These are harder.
And it's not like technology isn't necessary. So the way we talk about it is like technology is necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient.
Okay, so other questions here, and and I'm just going to apologize to everybody that I'm not getting to everything, but one of the things that people were asking about is, how do these connect to the roles of artificial intelligence and Internet of Things and connected devices? So obviously we thought about that some. Huge relationship.
Yeah, well, and we've only thought about it because there isn't that much activity around some of the artificial. There's a lot of hype around artificial intelligence and what that can do for organizations. We were at a conference recently at the Media Lab actually, and an executive at a prominent old industrial company.
That's really disguised.
Was asked, how big a deal is artificial intelligence? And if you're looking for, like, oftentimes, like some of these trends they're called hype, but you don't get a specific illustration of the level of hype. Well, we got one here, and he said, and I said, like, how does this compare? How does artificial intelligence compare as a phenomena of change relative to electricity or some of the other sort of factors in the Industrial Revolution? And they said, bigger than electricity. So if you're looking for like a way of characterizing the hype, I know I'm not just addressing all that, but we do think about artificial intelligence, connected devices is an incredibly interesting and important phenomena that goes right to the heart of what we're talking about with respect to data sharing.
Actually, so analytics is the core of these two things. Most AI approaches now are relying on quality data. Most of the data in the future you can think of is coming from connected devices. So these are linked in deep ways, and people that seem to be on top of that governance that David was just mentioning, that are on top of how they share that information, we see them as being very well poised for advantage in the future here. Let's see. I don't know. I'm kind of looking at time. We have time for a couple of other questions, and actually that leads me to put David on the spot and ask, where's all this going? And channel your inner Puxatawny Phil and your prognosticate. What's the future here? We got several questions that I would line up in the category of what's happening next. So, what do you think about next? Extend these results.
Well, I think what we're finding is that analytics is being used more and more for innovation, and there are more people thinking about using data and analytics in innovative ways within their organization. There's just a whole different orientation to data and the potential uses of it using analytics, and I think that's only going to deepen. And the fact that artificial intelligence, Internet of Things is on the horizon, this cognitive technology groundswell is happening, although it's happening in a very like 2 steps forward or 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of way. It's one, very exciting. I think organizations have a lot of strategic opportunity to cultivate if they devote the right level of resources to it. And by resources, I mean not only the technology, but as we were talking about, sort of leadership commitment and organizational change. I mean, really I guess what I would say is, big changes are on the horizon, but the horizon is really far away. And that's part of the reason why it's called a horizon. And companies move very, very slowly, and I think that's something to not lose sight of as we think about sort of what's next. Because what's next is going to be an incremental step. It's not going to be the horizon.
I like the emphasis that's coming across around standards and governance. There was a couple questions about standardization and how do you share data, and I'm really hoping that the people who have taken the time to get their governance processes in place, who've thought about the way that they swap data with other people, are going to get payoff in the next round. That's an investment that they had to make, and it was unclear how that investment was going to pay off when people were talking about the next exciting, development in analytics, and governance doesn't seem that exciting. But I love the fact that it seems like that may pay off for people. As they've gotten on top of getting organized internally, as they've gotten their processes in place, then I think that those people are poised to leap, and that might be a pretty big leap given the technologies that are coming.
So do we have enough time for me to put you on the spot?
We have 2 minutes. Actually, it depends on what you put me on the spot for. We might run out of time if it's a tough question.
All right, no, the question is short. I think it will depend more on your answer. So to what extent is security an important part of this data governance story?
Yeah, so he's teeing me up because I have a huge, long history of both analyzing security data, literally myself, and of that being a topic. We, as a society, historically underinvest in this, and that's part of my appeal to why I like governance, is that it's part of that security model. And I'm hoping that the people who've taken the time to make improvements and make security investments will get paid off. They'll get paid off when the Internet of Things devices that they communicate back and forth, we have a tendency to throw devices out and hope for the best, and that just never works. And as we connect these to real things and real systems, that's going to become very real-world, physical world problems. That's particularly true of AI. As it increasingly interacts with the physical world, we're going to think of a credit card breach as being trivial. I'm hoping that people who are fired up about security and are investing in that will get payoff from better quality of data and better reliability of data in ways that they haven't before.
I wanted to ask you about spillover effects, but we're going to have to do that another time. Thank you, everybody. I think we're at an end. Steve,
Okay, thanks, gentlemen. Excellent discussion, excellent presentation. That does conclude our Q&A session. Just for the audience over the next few days, please look out for a feedback survey that we'll also send you via email. We greatly appreciate your thoughts and opinions on that. And that includes this portion of our program. So thank you again to our speakers, David Caron, Executive Editor of MIT Sloan Management Review, and Sam Ransbotham, Associate Professor of Information Systems at Boston College and Guest Editor at MIT SMR. Of course, we also want to thank our sponsor, SAS. A reminder that the recording of this program will be available within the next 3 to 4 business days. We'll send you an email, and thank you all for attending our program today. Have a great day.